Good morning and welcome back to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidir. You're still listening to Salam Media, your home of humanitarian journalism. And today we'll be diving into a heated discussion on media responsibility and accuracy when it comes to reporting. Recently, the South African Muslim Network, or SAMNET for short, has filed a formal complaint against a report aired by the state broadcasters SABC's SAFM, which they argue presented a biased perspective on an incident which I mentioned before we went on that break, that Maccabi Tel Aviv and Ajax Amsterdam match, which unfortunately ended up in clashes between the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, which were literally instigating and provoking pro-Palestinian activists in Amsterdam. They were taking down flags, Palestinian flags. They were chanting, anti-Palestinian slogans. They were mocking the killing of Palestinian babies. And this is all happening in what was supposed to be, a normal midweek football Champions League game. But we know how these things always end up, especially when there's Zionists involved. The report, which aired on November 8th, described events as an unprovoked attack against Israeli supporters. This was by the SABC, by the way. However, Samnet claims that the report lacked critical context, ignoring actions allegedly taken by the Israeli fans against Palestinian supporters and their symbols. And joining us in a bit is Dr. Faisal Suliman. He's the chairperson of SAMNET, who's going to be helping us shed more light on this complaint and the call for fair and biased media coverage. Dr. Suliman, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Always a pleasure having you right here on Salam Media.
Thank you so much. Morning to you and the listeners. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. I think maybe let's start off by, unpacking some of SAMNET's main concerns regarding that SAFM report. What were some of the specific elements that you found problematic? Because I think this was such a well-documented, story. There were videos and all kinds of information online, and different publications from the whole world covered it. The facts were there and bare for everyone to see. But where do you think SAFM got it wrong?
Yes, so fortunately, I heard it myself. It was such a shockingly one-sided report that it definitely warranted a complaint. And what was more concerning for me is why would a seasoned journalist like John Gericke, who's been doing sports and even current affairs, for more than 20 years, present such a shockingly one-sided report? So basically, what he said was, the Israeli supporters, as you've mentioned in the preamble, Maccabi the supporters have been attacked in Amsterdam, and the IDF is saying it's going to airlift them, and then it played a Sky's News clip, which was just completely one-sided. It was basically these guys, as if these guys were sitting around having coffee, and pro-Palestinian people just attacked them, and that was the crux of the report. And as you mentioned, this story, one 10-second Google search would have shown him everything surrounding it, that gave context to it, that gave the other side of the story, and none of that was presented in that news report. And so two things come up. One is sort of what agenda, and I have to say it because this is a seasoned professional. It was so obvious. There was so much about it. It's not as if there was no, he could have been forgiven to say, no, there was nothing there. That's all he saw. Why he would present such a biased report. And the other part of the question is we haven't complained because, but we should include in our complaint to the BCSA. But what we're wanting to send to him is, he made it sound as if, it was politics interfering with sport. But as we know, Palestinian Olympians, potential Olympian soccer team members, all of them have been targeted with drones and massacred in their homes, in hospitals. So if he was concerned about politics and sport, there should have then been a long time ago a report talking about how Israelis have been massacring Palestinian sports people, men and women. So I would just, we know the Zionist Federation, Friends of Israel, this whole grouping of the Zionist movement in South Africa, have deep pockets, well resourced. They take journalists out for coffee. We don't know if there's brown paper bag journalism involved here. Clearly, we know there was a program many years ago, started many years ago, where journalists were taken to Israel on tour of Israel, a sort of one-sided, um, as if maybe you're too young to remember, as if a white person came here in the 70s or 80s by the nationalist government and landed in Cape Town, went to see all the sites in a bus or with a tour guide, and in the meantime was fed propaganda, then, taken to Kruger Park and Johannesburg, Sandton City, and all of this, and would have went back and said, "Where's the apartheid? All the black
Mm,
people I saw were looking pretty happy." So this is sort of tours that Israel has been doing. The lobby has been doing. Zionist Federation and Southern African Jewish Board of Deputies have been doing for some time now, taking journalists you won't find it on the internet because it's done very quietly and secretively. But when I heard this report, I just wondered whether Chiraka was one of the beneficiaries of such a trip and largesse by the Zionist Federation, because it was a shockingly one-sided report. So that is the part that concerned us. And then secondly is, as you said, people, the SABC is the public broadcaster, is meant to reflect the whole story. In private media, people have their internal bias. 702, Cape Talk, and the newspapers will have their own bias, and it's not, as long as it's not grossly inaccurate. Fox News is, and anyone who watches mainstream media will know this. You can show one side of the story,
mm,
because you haven't signed any code of conduct, you haven't pledged to be fair and balanced. But SABC has. It's the public broadcaster. It's meant to reflect stories that are important to South Africans, um, etc. And
mm,
therefore, the need to have this complaint to put Chirika on notice, and importantly, to draw the public's attention to the fact that we mustn't let these things go. As we know now, Zionist Federation doesn't stop in even the smallest things, wanting to take
mm,
a chef to court because they made a statement that's pro-Palestinian, attacking Professor Mahdi, the Dean of Health Sciences, because he posted something pro-Palestinian, attacking Dr. Imtiaz Suliman, um, and just trying to denigrate their reputations. So they don't let a single small thing go, even though they're in the wrong. And I think we would like a SAMNET to develop this culture in the public, in our public, in the pro-Palestinian community, in the Muslim community, people just interested in right and wrong. That we shouldn't be letting anything like this go. We shouldn't be tolerating the sort of bias that John Chirika reported last Friday. And people have to become more proactive on these complaints. I mean, we've complained to BCCSA as SAMNET, but nothing stops people even now going on social media, and without being rude, without the use of expletives, but just on facts, just
mm.
on context, to be bombarding someone like the SABC, the SAFM social media, John Heinrich himself, with expressions of disgust at such poor reporting, and of asking for an apology or context.
No, definitely. And I think, if there's one thing that's concerning for me, particularly when we call out, media bias in the mainstream, is there's this perception that when we call for, clear and truthful reporting that's based on facts, we are calling for a pro-Palestinian narrative. And that's not necessarily what we're calling for. We're calling for the truth. And it just so happens that the truth says the instigators of violence, the instigators of these clashes, were the supporters of Maccabi Tel Aviv, and just generally, holistically, when you'd call out such bias, that you'd be accused, oh no, you want us to push, a Palestinian agenda. How do we get to that point where we make people understand that we don't want to push a Palestinian agenda? Yes, some sects are pro-Palestinian. There are people that support the cause of South Africa as a country. We've made it quite clear that we support the cause for the rights of the people of Palestine and their self-determination, but we're not necessarily calling for propaganda thereof. We're just calling for the truth. Are we able to make people understand that fact?
Yeah, I think see, there's two or three parts to this. The first is the ethics of journalism, and I think that's what firstly you're talking about is reporting factually.
Mm.
And that I think is something maybe you learn as a journalist in your training. You learn to be all about ethics when you're becoming a doctor or
That's
anything else, and
first
then of
year.
course
First year journalism. They teach you the ethics of journalism.
exactly
Yeah.
exactly that so that's the theory, and that's what's the right and the wrong of it. And then secondly, once you're there, your editor says this is the slant. When you're going to work for Fox News or one of these newspapers, you're going to work for one of the Sunday Times publications, you're going to have to curtail a lot of what you say or what you see. And it can be quite blatant, like that Sky News report on what happened, the one that the clip that Hireka played. So that's the first part. The second part then is, choosing where you work. And it's not always so easy because you need to put food on the table and etc. And we know many journalists, who've been embedded or who are now silent, and we see it all over the world. The third part of it, you see, as journalists, you guys have a standard, and you guys have a duty, a public duty to report accurately and fairly. The fourth part, though, is for the public. We have an agenda here, an agenda we must be unashamed of, and that is to push for what is right and wrong. And in this case, there's an entire people being eradicated as we sit here. They have been wiped off the face of the earth mercilessly in their homes, in hospitals, in their playgrounds. Well, there's no playgrounds left in Gaza. In Lebanon, people sitting innocently with their children round a table who had a pager on them were blown up with whoever was around them. I mean, people had and could have been in an aeroplane. There's no saying where the pager could have gone off. They could have downed entire aeroplanes. They could have downed, a ship. Someone sitting in the hull of in a ship, let alone holding your child or your little baby. So we are against a regime that I don't think words can describe anymore in terms of barbarism, in terms of shamelessness, in terms of just continuing live a genocide of a people.
Mm.
So there should be no, as far as the public goes, as far as pro-Palestinian advocates go, or even people just don't have to be pro-Palestinian, just have to know what is right and wrong and look at this and say. So in that case, there should be no, qualms. There should be no feeling like you have to justify it, to do whatever it takes within the ambit of the law. And that is one of the problems we have at the moment, in that everybody all over the world wants to stick to the law
Mm.
um, for various reasons. But the enemy, they're not sticking to any law. In fact, they're breaking every possible human uh, rights law, every possible just law of decency and morality in Gaza and in Lebanon. And therefore they're getting away with it because behind them they have this army of lawyers and media personalities who are churning out propaganda in every sphere of the media, whether it's print, whether it's online, whether it's digital, radio like yours or whatever, podcasts, etc. And thousands of trolls sitting on the internet,
Mm.
harassing, attacking, calling out, shaming, or even blackmailing people who want to present a different narrative. And I think what we must do is not be afraid, not be intimidated, not be put off. And that is why you saw the attacks presently on Imtiaz Suleiman, on Professor Mahdi, on the chef Mariam Jacobs. It's basically suppression. It's an old tool, well used by the Zionists, and this label of anti-Semitism as a tool to suppress criticism, control the narrative, and keep reporters in line. And we shouldn't buy into it. We shouldn't even bother with it. We should be speaking out, calling out all of this unashamedly and, in fact, proudly.
Mm.
And that is what we'd like to see from the public.
Subnet has called for, a follow-up report and a public apology. What message do you hope this will send to SAFM and other media outlets within South Africa, who I think what's concerning for me are still very much citing, Western media when it comes to the Palestinian discourse. It's never about, finding sources or, about reading other different sources and trying to come up with the story yourself. But as you mentioned with that report, that after it was made, he ultimately played a clip from Fox News, if I'm not mistaken, when it is known quite clearly that that's a propaganda machine, for the Zionists. But you want to take that and put it on a public broadcaster such as the SABC. So I think there must be a bigger and broader message that other media outlets within South Africa could learn from this.
No, definitely. And I think people must make a habit of complaining to the press ombudsman, complaining, for example, to advertisers in the newspaper, where you see, many of the newspapers have Muslim businessmen, etc., who are large advertisers. And that must be other part of the pressure that's put on these people to do the right thing. So, yes, you're quite right. It was a Sky News clip, but of course, owned by the same Murdoch stable that owns Fox News and many other broadcasters. um, and therefore in the interest of doing the right thing, we do ask that SABC then retract the story or play the other part to give context to it. Importantly, it must show the reporter, it must show SABC that they can't get away with this, that people are listening, and we are going to use the tools that are available to us to ensure that this kind of blatant bias is not repeated. And therefore, it needs, our public who are listening to any radio station for that matter, any of the mainstream, any of the SABC channels, whether it's a podcast, whether it's the radio or television news, etc., to be aware and to look out for this kind of gross propaganda, and to report it to us so that we can do the formal complaining, but then also to get others on social media to email, write, tweet, whatever complaints. I mean, people are paying TV licenses. This is a state broadcaster, especially the SABC, because it has signed this code of conduct. It may be harder against 702. It's a private radio station, for example, with with its own pro-Zionist stance, which it's always had. But the SABC can be held accountable. Your taxes go towards paying for it. It's owned by the government, which means it's owned by the people.
Mm,
And that brings in another topic for another discussion. But just to talk on it while we're here on the SABC, is I imagine there's a large Zionist component behind the moves to privatize the SABC for this very reason. Because once you privatize it, you can then control the content. Um,
mm,
so if someone only has SABC and not going online and not streaming because they don't have internet or they can't afford it, etc., they're not going to see anything else. And I won't be surprised that the Zionist movement has that in its sights as well, to push for the privatization of the SABC. And it's something that I think the public must resist.
mm, mm. Just coming back to, South Africa's media landscape as a whole, do you believe that our media outlets here in South Africa are generally aware, or sensitive to the complexities of reporting on international conflicts, especially those involving Palestine and Israel? Is there a deeper understanding and appreciation of what's happening in that part of the world, and the responsibility that they have to play when it comes to making sure that the correct narrative is put out to the people?
I think anybody who's done a 4-year degree or who studied journalism and has a sense of ethics or professionalism where you research your stories will easily find two sides of any story. Find the context, find the background. We see it not only in Palestine, but on so many other issues, whether it's involving the context on how BRICS things are reported, what's happening in Kashmir, what's happening in Sudan and South Sudan, and the Central African Republic. Um, the problem is not finding the material. It's there. It's limiting your sources. So you mentioned, the SABC and Sky News or BBC, etc. And this is where, being on the board, working for these people, being in management, which is where we are lacking. And we encourage people always, whether it's SABC board, etc., is once they sign these long-term contracts for content, and then the content only comes from there. And that's the beauty of controlling media. You don't have to control every small little station all over the world, but all you have
Mm,
to do is ensure they sign the contracts with the source. And if you're controlling what comes from Reuters and the few mainstream media outlets, AFP, CNN stable, etc., you're essentially controlling the flow of news. And therefore you won't see SABC playing Al Jazeera clips.
mm,
But because their contracts are all with BBC and Sky News, and that is the other part of the pressure that people need to be putting on the portfolio committee, communications, the minister, the DG, and of course the SABC board, is to diversify its sources of news and the contracts it takes. Um, so the awareness is there, but like I say, if choosing to go work for CNN, on the first day you're going to know exactly what your role is and what you can say and what you can't say, especially around this part of the world, in the Middle East and Palestine in particular. And you'll then either want to keep your job and follow the line, or you won't have a job. And that's as blatant and as simple as it is. I mean, 702 is a very good example, or the Prime Media stable,
mm.
the private newspapers, whether it's in the Caxton, whether it's Iron, the Independent Online. The editors and sub editors who've been there know exactly what the policy of the newspaper or the outlet is, and you have to follow it. And that's, otherwise you don't have a job.
Mm, mm. No, definitely. And in wrapping up, you've sent your complaint out to the BCCSA. What's next now? What's the next step? Are they still reviewing it? Are they going to come back to you
Yes.
after they did the investigation?
So generally what happens in a case like this, the BCCSA will forward that complaint to the SABC, will ask for a clip, that clip, the segment that was played, a podcast of it, analyze it themselves and wait for the SABC's response, and then assess it and give a ruling. Either tell us the complaint is not valid, or tell the SABC yes, there's validity. And they may not, like a court case or a judge, they may not agree with all of the things we've asked for, but ask the SABC perhaps to play an alternative part. So we wait for that. But in the meantime, what it does do is, clearly John Chireko will get the complaint, SABC news editor will get the complaint. He's put them on notice that people are listening, and you cannot have broadcasts like this going out into the public domain.
All right, we're
Such
going to leave it.
bias, reporting.
All right, we're going to leave it there, Dr. Faisal Suliman. Thank you so much for giving us your time, and unpacking. I think this is a very, very important topic. The fact that, at least according to me, and being around, South African media colleagues, especially those that are in the mainstream, I can tell you for certain there isn't enough appreciation, and knowledge and the will to know more and understand about the different narratives when it comes to Palestine and Israel and how those dynamics work. They're largely not interested. If they're doing it, it's just to fill a gap, within the show. It's not about pushing the correct narrative, because I can tell you for certain, I know them and I've been around them, that appreciation is not there. So yeah, thank you so much for pointing that out. And it's quite obvious now for the whole of the country to see that, and for people like John himself to be exposed. So we're going to leave it there for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Dr. Faisal Suliman, South African Muslim Network chairperson, and just had a really interesting conversation with him regarding a report by the SABC over that Maccabi Tel Aviv and Ajax Amsterdam game, where there were clashes instigated by Israeli supporters, but well, the SABC, South Africa's state broadcaster, had a different narrative. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, News and Views continues. Thank you so much to everyone that's watching online. Premika and Costa, we see your comments. Continue watching, and we'll see you again after this.
We are here in the middle of a Zahra neighborhood. The whole neighborhood is already destroyed. More than 17 towers are down. Here, as you can see, the firefighters trying their best to help. The people are still under the rubble. A lot of the people.
Join Hamza on his exclusive South African tour as he shares his personal experiences, never before seen footage, and powerful insights on the ongoing genocide in Gaza. This is more than just a talk. It's an invitation to witness Gaza through the lens of Hamza Sha'alan. Don't miss this opportunity to meet the photojournalist who brought Gaza's pain and perseverance to the world in its darkest moments. Follow Salam Media on social media pages for more on this tour and be part of a